Good afternoon. Welcome to our panel on ethics and evaluation. Thanks for being here and hope you had a good lunch and you're ready. You had some coffee and you're awake. Otherwise, we'll wake you up. We have three fantastic panelists and a really important topic at hand. My name is Tina Tolchmann-Nebe. I'm a senior evaluation specialist at UNDP's Independent Evaluation Office. And I'm also one of the co-authors of the ethical guidelines of the United Nations Evaluation Group. Ladies and gentlemen, ethical scandals periodically engulf public institutions, and my own institution, the United Nations, is not an exception. We had the oil for food scandal in 2003, sexual abuse of children by UN peacekeepers in the Central African Republic in 2014, and now perhaps some of you have seen the documentary Whistleblowers Inside the UN. This is deeply troubling, given our collective mandate to fight disease, hunger, and climate change, and protect those most at risk. So ethics is a big deal in evaluation. There's a big reputational risk, as you just heard from my examples. And there's also a moral imperative for evaluators to be role models, to be behavioral independent, and to show integrity. For those of you who are commissioners of evaluations, one of the questions is, how can we support oversight on ethical questions? How can we make sure that ethical questions are on the agenda of what institutions are evaluating? As we have seen in recent years, there has been a shift in evaluation ethics guidance from doing no harm to doing good. And that is one of the key themes that we want to explore today. What does this mean to do good? And how can we do this in practice? So we have three fantastic speakers here today with us, and all of you in the audience, who I'm sure will enrich with your examples and experience. Let me introduce you to Adeline Sibanda, who's the past president of the African Evaluation Association, a past co-chair of Eval Partners, and past president of the International Organization for Cooperation and Evaluation. And Adeline has been raising awareness and advocating for Made in Africa evaluation. And she really is an expert on culture and taking context into consideration in conducting evaluations. She has 29 years of experience in evaluation, including indigenous and culturally responsive strategy and program design and planning. Adeline will be our first speaker, and we will then roll into the second and third presentation, after which we can open up for discussion. Adeline, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to be talking about around the African evaluation principles. As you know, this session is about ethics, but I would like to give you a background on the African evaluation principles that have ethics incorporated within them. But first of all, just a quick reason why the African evaluation principles. I'm sure you know that from 2007, we had the African evaluation guidelines. That we first, designed in 2002, then revised in 2007. When we started talking about Made in Africa evaluation, we saw that it was important to review the African evaluation principles, guidelines to African evaluation principles, because they needed to take, into consideration the indigenous and cultural, issues and context specific issues. And therefore we came up with the African evaluation principles that were designed in a participatory manner with, association members from all over Africa. Just a brief why before I go into my presentation. So they've been developed in service of all who commit to evaluation that serves the people of Africa. as they strive to chart a bright path to the future. And I think we all know that in the past, evaluation has been done to Africans rather than for Africans by Africans. So we want to make sure that we promote evaluation from that perspective. So, so they are, rooted in a made in Africa sort of approach, rooted and tailor-made for African context and needs and knowledge systems, and and yet informed by international practices. So that is important for us. So what are the evaluation principles? So we've got 5 evaluation principles, and these are on their FREER website. And the first is the evaluation empowers Africans. The next is the evaluation is technically robust, but because very often we actually think when we talk about indigenous knowledge and culturally responsive or context specific, we often think, oh, it's going to compromise the technical robustness of the evaluation, but not. The evaluation is ethically sound, and the evaluation is rooted in Africa, yet draws from across the world. And lastly, the evaluation shows the connectedness of the world. So those are the important principles that we are looking at. When we look at the evaluation that is powerful for Africans, basically we are looking at just 4 areas that we want to look at. And I'm not going to speak to everything. I'm going to be highlighting things that are specific to ethics. So I think that we want to conduct an appropriate empowering process. I think this, for me, is very important because we want to realize that when we are in a community or in an area, we know that there is some knowledge that exists within those communities. There is indigenous knowledge that exists, and there are ways of knowing that we need to take into consideration when we do evaluations. We also want to encourage reciprocity, including mutual accountability. And we want to enable learning for useful insights, value and strengthen domestic capacities. And very often we've got evaluators that just fly in and fly out and come up with a very important decision that can change the lives of those communities, but without understanding the communities themselves. So evaluations that are technically robust, I want to just emphasize here that we were talking, we also want to make sure, besides everything that we know, we want to make sure that we are culturally responsive. And how do we do that? We need to understand the context. What is important for those communities? And what do they value? Because it's not just about the values of the evaluator. It's also about the values of those people that we are evaluating. What is it that they're expecting out of the program, out of the intervention? And what does change or success look like for them? That is important. As I said, I'm not really touching everything, but I'll just touch a few areas where I'm wanting to emphasize, because I'm sure we can all read. So ethically sound. So we must be sensitive to stakeholders and relationships. I think as evaluators, we often go in as commissioners as well into communities and feel like, we are really coming there to help them and we are the savior of the world. But no, we need to be sensitive to these stakeholders, because without them, we actually don't have jobs. We need to protect the rights of the people. They have rights. So we often go into a community and say, oh, how much do you earn? Can you imagine if I was to come to you and ask you how much do you earn without even getting to know you, without even creating that relationship? But we expect the community to just say, oh yes, I earn £5 a day, that sort of thing. And so we must be reflective about what we are doing. So reflexivity is very important. We need to safeguard the diversity and inclusion, and those issues are important. And some of these issues actually are similar to some of the standards or ethical principles that we've heard across from other organizations. We want to address inequalities and power asymmetries. The issue of power asymmetries for me is key, because very often we don't realize that there are power dynamics that are going on within our process of evaluating. There's always somebody who holds power, there's somebody who has power over, and so forth. So we need to be aware of that. So be free from vested interest. And, I've often known that when we go into an evaluation, we're expecting certain results. And therefore, maybe because of what we know about that community, or for what we've read, we don't really know what we know about that community, we often come up with biased results. So it's important. And we must also consider trade-offs. As I say, some of these things, we've heard them in different ways, but we are emphasizing the importance from our own, Made in Africa sort of perspective. We want to engage with issues that matter in Africa. I think and we all know that development is being done to Africa, or we are supporting Africa to develop, but we don't really want to engage further and say, what are the issues that matter to the different groups of people within those communities? And therefore, I've already spoken around even the outcomes that they want to see from an intervention may not be the ones that you are expecting. So we need to understand that. What is the indigenous knowledge systems that we can learn from and use as we do our evaluations? And how can we collect data in a way that also honors the people of the land? So we want to consider the framings and methods from Africa. And we also want to learn and adapt from the global South and indigenous communities and other countries. And we know that much work has been done in different countries, around indigenous evaluation, around indigenous knowledge systems. So we want to be able to learn from there. I think the last one is around connected with the world, and I will not read that. That you will find on the website, FRIA website. And so basically, those are the African evaluation principles. So we are emphasizing the Africa-centric approach to evaluation. And who can use this? Everyone who's doing evaluation in Africa. So thank you.
Adeline, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for unpacking for us the Africa-centric approach and what it means to do culturally responsive evaluation, to make us think about reflexivity, power symmetries, and the safeguards that we need to put in place to protect the rights of those that participate in our evaluations. Thanks a lot. Our second speaker is Nicoletta Stame. She's a professor emerita of the Department of Communication and Social Research of Sapienza University of Rome, and also co-founder and first president of the Italian Evaluation Association. Nicoletta has also been a past president of the European Evaluation Society, associate editor of the journal Evaluation, and she's well known for her books on theory and methods of evaluation. In fact, she's just published one on ethics, which I believe you have here, Nicoletta, right? And so we have the pleasure of welcoming her today to hear the very latest thinking on ethics for evaluation.
I think I was prepared to be there. Thank you very much for running this session, very interesting since the beginning, and for raising this issue. The title of this session is From Guidance to Practice. And I want to talk about the practice of mine, which is edited in this book. But this book starts from the idea, from the recognition that the guidance for ethics have changed a lot in the last few years, and they changed in a direction which are just introduced, and that also the ones in which you have been a co-author are written. That is that ethics in evaluation has become something much more important than it used to be, and also it has changed its outlook from what it was considered at the beginning. So at the beginning, people were saying that why ethics, why should ethics be a principle for evaluation guidance, whereas we know now from whatever we say that ethics is very important, and also that we have to have a different way of looking at ethics from the point of view of how we do evaluation and what type of evaluation we are concerned with, etc. So what I will excuse me, no. Okay, so the book I'm referring to and the experience is this one, because this book is called Ethics for Evaluation, Beyond Doing No Harm to Tackling Bad and Doing Good. So there is something in between, doing no harm and doing good. And the book has been written starting from this idea that we should have a consideration of ethics, a larger consideration of ethics as we used to have. And it was justified by the fact that the evaluation guidelines that had been issued recently were considering more issues, more items referring to ethics and evaluation than that used to be the old ones. So what I'm trying to say is that there has been a way of doing evaluation that considered ethics as a type of very minor issue, very minor idea, and we have moved toward, and that was implicit in the way in which we conceived evaluation, the projects, and what we had to do. And then now we are moving towards something which is different. The example that has just been presented is something which goes exactly in that direction. But at the beginning, in the evaluation literature and the evaluator community, ethics was considered something like a normal behavior. You should be correct in what you are doing. But being correct in what you are doing meant that you had a program, you thought of a program in terms of something that you have to do this and that. You have programs that were isolated from the rest. You consider also, we always hear talking about the fact that we should overcome the silos approach. Change was expected in a certain way. And the evaluator, you had to be an expert in methodology, how to deal with this type of program from a very restricted way, and especially being value neutral, which meant that the values he had to consider were those that were imbued in the program since the beginning, from what the decision maker, what the program was intended to do. That was considered to be the value. And so you did not have to challenge and to contest that value. So what was the idea of an ethical evaluator? Doing no harm, having no conflict of interest with the people, do not treat them badly, etc. But there was not a sense of responsibility, a sense of involvement in what you were doing from the point of view of the evaluator. But now things have changed enormously, and have changed from the point of view that we know that the programs have changed because the environment has changed. Everything has changed in what we are doing. So here it's a real proof of that. We are talking always in terms of complexity, of conflict of values, of sustainability, of long-term programs, and change is not just simply, we know that change is not just what is expected from the program from A to B doing this or that, but we know that change is what happens in different ways, even when not expected. So we have to react, to reflect on what happens, and to reflect from the point of view of here it comes from a point of view of a responsibility of the evaluator and all those people who are concerned with the program that is going on. So the evaluator should be value critical. He should not simply accept the values as given, but he realizes that he finds himself or herself in a situation where people have different values. And here comes all the problems of context, all the problems of culture, whatever has been raised from this point of view. You find yourself in a complex situation of uncertainty. You don't know what is right or wrong, but this doesn't mean that you cannot find it together with the people who are concerned, who are inside the program. So when I hear here in this conference, everybody talking about interact, collaborate, find the network, etc. This also has a reference with this idea of finding the right solution, because you don't have something already said what it is good and what it is just, but you have to listen to various people, to collaborate, and then to find out something which can be fruitful, useful, and equitable in the situation. evaluation. So the principle of ethics, so this refers to the behavior and to the way in which evaluation is conducted, but the principle of evaluation of ethics now are much larger than just doing no harm, because you have to consider that you are faced with something negative which is happening, and you have to say that it is negative. You have to take responsibility of criticizing and putting it to the attention of the decision makers. And also you are thinking in terms of doing good, because you want to help the people who are in a situation that you evaluate, to find the solutions that are helpful, that are suitable to them, that are where they are comfortable. Many things that have already been said in the first presentation. All these ideas are reflected in the guidelines that we now read. And so, whereas the guidelines that you read 10 and 20 years ago just had a very small, short notice on ethics and say do no harm, now you find items like take attention, make attention to wrongdoing, think in terms of interest and values that are different, and there are values from different points, context, culture. So there are many new items that refer to the guidance of ethics that you should take into consideration. This is something that we have considered here, and many chapters of the people that we have collected reflect on how it is possible to from the practice of the people who have done it, to do something, to think something in what to do, how to decide what to do from this point of view. But if this is how we should approach this, so the problem of ethics is helping people make good, just decision in an uncertain world. So thinking in terms that we don't know exactly what it is, but we should be prepared to think in these terms and put ethics as our way of thinking. So we called it a large area of ethics in evaluation, a large area from the point of view of evaluation. So we have to think in terms of ethics for the evaluator and ethics of the evaluations. The evaluator is ethical values concern is the professional conduct of the evaluator, and most guidelines are referred to that. But there was also an ethics of evaluation. So you have to have ethical values relevant for determining the acceptability, optimality of objectives and strategies. So don't simply say this is the program, nothing to do with it, but what it means to act when there are alternatives and the various open to the various stakeholders, and help them decide what to take into consideration. So we have framed all this in a big matrix that I show you, and I will briefly illustrate it. And we have asked the authors of the book to react to this matrix and to think to what does that mean to their experience. So we think that there are issues that refer the evaluator and the evaluators from these 3 points of view, from doing no harm, tackling bad, and doing good. And for each of these cells, we have made examples. We have tried to think what it meant. So in the book, you may find examples of how people have behaved in a singular situation, referring to what the evaluator should do, or what the evaluation in general terms is referred to the situation. So I just briefly comment on each of them. When we think in terms of doing no harm, the evaluator is the problem of the evaluator is identifying if there are unintended impact on the evaluee, so the relationship with the people whom they are. So it's a matter of privacy, of tactfulness in asking questions, not exposing of wrongdoing, avoiding conflict of interest, etc. So there is an idea of the fact that you refer to people. In general, say the relationship between the evaluator and the evaluee, how we are ethical in getting the information, not exposing them to something wrong, etc. So this is something we have always known and done and continues to be important. But also we have to think in terms of the evaluation in general. And here the idea is considering collateral damage, and there are in general, there are social and environmental safeguards that are issued when we already know before a program is started that it may enter into certain risk. So the concept in general of the area of evaluation is that you should consider risk. And what is a risk? Is something that you know might happen. So a risk is not something that comes without being prevented. It's something that you should consider before doing it. And this is very important because sometimes you say, oh, something happened that we did not expect. But if you have an experience of many years or something, you know that the risk of incurring in that problem exists. So the risk is something that you should always consider from your own experience. But then preventing bad is something different, because preventing bad means not simply, and this is, I think, that why we introduce this stronger thing than just doing no harm. Because preventing bad means, and there are many examples in the book, taking the responsibility of even acting against what the commissioner might expect. There is an example here of someone in which the evaluator did something that was not approved by the commissioner, by the policymaker, because he was in a sense exposing something wrong or something kind of corruption that was taking place, etc. But he took the own responsibility of doing that because he was sure that the program and the evaluation of the program would have been harmful to certain people. It was clear it was there. So he took this responsibility from the point of view that he did not want to do something that he knew it might have been harmful. But there is something more general, the general terms of the evaluation, which is what we call planned suffering. So sometimes you do something that you know will produce harm. And I have discussed even with someone here in the conference who is concerned that there is the example of dams and the example of the fact that there is a guidance, a safeguard that says that when you build a dam and you need to replace resettle people, there is the safeguard of improve or at least restore the livelihood and the living standards of the people who are replaced. So this means that if people lived in a very bad situation, you restore them to the same bad situation as before. If you do not understand that each program should be a development program, it should be something that provides something good. So if you don't take, once again, the responsibility of presenting to the people who are planning and implementing all this program that something bad is already planned inside the program, and so there you have to do what you can do to say that this should not be done or there should be something different. So the example here is that the evaluator in a situation like that were able to create new opportunities for the people who were resettled, and it was a result of the evaluation of the suggestion of the evaluation. And last point, which is doing good. I'm very keen on this because doing good is not simply the good relationship between the evaluator who should trust, treat stakeholders, respect them with dignity, and all the type of good relationship with the people that we know. But evaluation in general, in the evaluation, doing good from the general evaluation point of view means how the evaluation can benefit society and the target population. And this is, we have identified that as discovering and supporting a positive and innovative solution to serious problems. And this is what I really think when we talk in the previous session on sustainability. We were always talking about the fact that whatever program finds in a situation where it is possible to see that big predicaments have been approached and the solution have been found, people have already been able to tackle something. So there might be good solution, just equitable solution at present that should be emphasized, should be brought to the attention and considered in general. So it is not just that you find something that happened and that doesn't mean anything. If you find something good that happens because a solution was already provided or it was in sight or it is possible to see something that comes out from this situation, then you are able to do good to the situation in general, so to improve the situation in general, which means, of course, you do it by empowering the voice of the stakeholder, by acknowledging the social innovation, sustaining creativity, etc. So these are all ideas that enter into the concept of doing good in a moment in which our programs are complex, are programs that tackle big issues that have never been tackled, and they should be tackled from the point of view of connection between different situations and different levels. And of course, I enter into the field of the previous session, which was devoted to sustainability and to environment. And I think that whatever they said, that we should put together all this issue of environment together with the social and economic values and social and economic goals, and the ethical dimension is something that should enter together with these other dimensions and be part of it. Because when we think, and we always think in terms that there are social, economic, and environmental effects, and the ethical dimension really enters across the three of them, and it should be understood in these more general terms. Otherwise, we would be just a profession of people who have a kind of ethic as any other type of consultant, whereas as evaluators and evaluation in general as a business, as an enterprise, is something that wants to contribute to improve the situation. But now we have to know what is the situation, and we want to be up to the need, to the challenge of the situation that we are facing all over. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicoletta. Thank you for laying out the evolution of evaluation ethics over the last decade or so, and for really bringing home this idea that evaluation is no longer a value neutral exercise. Evaluators have responsibilities. The exercise itself is meant to do good and help good and just decision in an unequal world, as you said. So this doing good, what is it? How can we do it? Our next speaker, Laura Fantini, will give us a more practical approach. Laura is an independent consultant focusing on designing, managing, monitoring, and evaluating international development projects and programs in several countries of the Global South. She's also a member of the Evaluation Advisory Committee of the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and a former board member of the European Evaluation Society. Laura is a trainer on project cycle management, and she's an expert on positive thinking approaches. You have the floor.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tina, for the presentation. And I ask to have the indicator. Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, as Tina said, I have an extensive experience before approaching to the evaluation. I had an extensive experience as a development practitioner, as implementers. So I want to start my presentation just where Nicoletta ended her presentation about focusing on the doing good and jumping from the guideline into practice and offering to you a specific angle today that focus on the relationship in between the evaluators and implementers. Specifically the local implementers. Because among evaluators, there is sometimes the belief that some characteristics and abilities are specific to evaluators and not implementers, such as the critical thinking, attitude to question project assumptions, capacity to value the local knowledge and local actors, ability to extract lessons, ability to systematize knowledge, and evaluative thinking. I want to focus especially on the evaluative thinking because sometimes there are evaluation and implementation are two boxes and sometimes are two separate. And this is more evident if we think in the relationship between evaluators and local implementers. Who are the local implementers? Are those people that are the last chain, the last part of the chain of the implementation that usually not participate into the decision-making process of an implementation, nor in the process of evaluation design, but they are who makes things happening in the field. At the end of the day, they are people who really know the context, the culture, the variety in a country. And so speaking in practice world, I want to bring the experience I had advising a global NGO whose main mandate is to foster rural development in Global South, in several regions of the Global South, through knowledge management and South-South cooperation. They focus mainly on harvesting and scaling up homegrown innovation, systematizing local successful practices, co-creating local knowledge, and promoting peer-to-peer learning. This is an approach that really evocates what we sometimes in evaluation we call the positive deviance. Understanding that in every society maybe something works, and as Nicoletta said, the role of evaluators is also to detect what is working well, even against the assumption of the project or program design. And the methodology used by the NGO is very briefly on 4 main steps. Identify local champions. They call local champions outstanding people that have some capacities. We can define them local innovators. And work together with them in order to elicit this tacit knowledge and know-how they have. Because as Adeline said, sometimes you go in the field and we ask, what are your best practice? What are your best? But it's not the case sometimes to go with this lack of empathy, and to elicit what is a good practice is a process itself. So the second step is start a participatory process with all the local actors that are really the chain of the activities the program is implementing in the field, and try with them to understand what are the innovative solutions they already have beyond the boundaries of the program implemented. And thirdly, facilitate peer-to-peer knowledge exchange in between them in order to support who is learning to to adapt, to scale up this solution, and also with the tacit objective to give a value to this local knowledge, give a value to these we can call local champions, because in the field always happened that some of them became trainers in their community, and this knowledge is used by the programs and projects as something for free. So one of the tacit objectives of this process is also to give a value to this knowledge. I want to briefly introduce a couple of examples, very practical, of programs we observed very close. One was implemented in Burkina Faso. It was a program building water catchments in order to storage water during the dry season. And it was implemented by the Ministry of Water, and the NGO was called to analyze the intervention to detect the good practices to be scaled up in other parts of the country. Starting with this approach, going into the field and hearing the voice of the direct beneficiaries, it was quite soon evident that something didn't work as expected. And so it was also an example of adaptive implementation somehow, because the donor was able to change the angle, the perspective, the mindset, and address the NGO to do an evaluative research about the impact, an impact evaluative research. And many of these basins were really not so fruitful as expected for several reasons. One of them is the technical challenges and high cost of maintenance, because the intervention was based on local labor, and many of these basins remain functional only for one season. Lack of integration of traditional practice. What does it mean? Something related to what Adeline was speaking about indigenous people. There were many practices at local level, very small, tackling the same adaptation measure of storage in water that were not taken into consideration, and many beneficiaries complained because they were successful. So why not funding a large scale of this already in place practice instead of bringing something new? Thirdly, the lack of understanding of nutrition and water use strategy already in place. A big issue was related also with access to land, because many basins were devoted to irrigate big plots for cereal crops. And actually cereal crops is not the main use people did in that areas. They mostly survive with horticultural small plots close to their house or very far to the basins. So this means changing their strategy, their livelihood strategy, because the project was focused on basins. And lastly, equity issues, because the basin were constructed on plots owned by certain farmers that, of course, they were able also to mobilize labor, and this reinforced some inequity issues and problem of access to water into the community. Briefly, the second example is a project on adaptation strategies in Puntland, implemented in agriculture and livestock sector. And here we have another example of at the beginning of the intervention, we were called to support the project in this phase of understanding what was in the field. And the baseline of the program was there are no actually good practice on resilience in the agriculture and livestock sector in the target areas. And the NGO started with the same approach. Okay, let's have a look at what happened here. And with this approach, we were able to detect 15 local champions and related good practice that have already in place some adaptation strategies to climate change. And we collected this knowledge to bring it to the project implementers and to the donors. And what was the result of this project? It was a change of mindset of the implementers. They said it was the first time that they were looking at the beneficiary with another perspective. It was the first time that they had the chance to touch with their hands that something was working. Despite the inception phase was saying the contrary. And also another result was to including this local champion into their capacity building activities and avoid replication, avoid to teach them something that they already know. This is to say what? That both example disclose some example of doing good. If evaluation value, evaluative thinking of the implementers and through them go more into the context variety. And what this process, what are the lessons we can extract from these two examples? Firstly, we were able to offer to governmental bodies and the development aid agencies that was funding the two initiatives, some evidence of how, what we call positive deviance, but we can call it in a how we want, this approach to go in the field and value what is working, really disclose complexity and help to understand and to disclose hidden factors of the local context and value local-led, local-owned solutions. Secondly, it demonstrates how embedding and promoting practitioners' evaluative thinking facilitates an adaptive and more successful project management. Thirdly, they show how the project partners and stakeholders can modify their perspective along the implementation phase. We are speaking in the second case, it was a study that was it's an intermediate study. So during the implementation, the first case was unfortunately a post evaluation. Fourthly, they are good example of what is Ellerman said as a development paradigm. So helpers and implementers, donors shouldn't be something perceived as external aid, but something that facilitates what the doers, the beneficiary already have in their context and facilitate what the context can offer. Lastly, evaluation and project implementation should speak each other with other languages, valuing cultural and context varieties. And lastly, and most provocative, maybe also this kind of approach evocates something that we still not speak. Is something that in the discourse of evaluation sometimes remain hidden. So the role of evaluators as an activist. So how much we need to be activist against what we see in the field and what we see during an implementation. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Laura. This was very interesting, focusing on what is working well. And starting from what people already know thinking of implementers as partners that have similar skill set, not as those that, we come in and teach evaluative thinking. So very interesting there. We've heard about culturally responsive approaches and why that is important to evaluation ethics. We've heard about being value critical and how evaluation ethics have evolved over time towards beneficence and doing good. And we've heard about the equity issues and the participatory approach, where we're moving into the developmental field, where evaluators are activists holding hands of those that are being evaluated and those that are partnering in implementation. Fascinating. Let's throw it open to the group. As the chair prerogative, I want to throw in one question while you think of yours. Something that came to my mind, especially listening to Adeline, is about the universal nature or not of evaluation ethics. Adeline was telling us that we need to contextualize evaluative practice. At the same time, we also heard about some principles such as respect, integrity, that are close to to human rights principles that are universal. So I wanted to throw out the question, perhaps to everyone, as well as the panelists, are we talking about evaluation ethics that are universal, or which parts are universal and which parts are perhaps specific to cultures and contexts? How should we frame this and think about this? But let's collect a few more questions before we give it back to the panel. Yes, please go ahead. And after you and Ada, and for now, no one from this side, Carrie.
I guess I'll start because I have the mic that's turned on.
Go ahead.
My name's Isabelle Mercier. I am the Director of Evaluation at Global Affairs Canada. I'm also the Vice Chair of EvalNet, where I've decided to put on the agenda ethics and evaluation for the upcoming year or two for EvalNet. So I'm really excited about this conversation today. Everything the panelists said really resonated with me. Just by way of sharing, a few years ago, our organization, Global Affairs Canada, became a feminist organization. It declared itself to be feminist. And I actually don't have a background in evaluation. My background is in philosophy and ethics. So it was easy in feminist epistemology too. So it was very exciting for me to be able to embrace that feminist lens and apply it to my work as an evaluator. So we embraced feminist principles and feminist evaluation, which works in lockstep with reflections about ethics, ethics and evaluation. And so we've developed our frameworks for ethics, for thinking about ethics, and we've really tried to integrate all those aspects that you're talking about into our work, including being activists and advocates. And it's been a challenging road, but I think we've had some success. My question is, one of the challenges I've found is in terms of capacity building. We've created some tools, checklists and things to get people to start thinking as practitioners about this. We also have a mentoring sort of approach to being an ethical evaluator. But I would love to hear among your group what you've done to help people really integrate these ideas about being an ethical evaluator in their work, because it's not just natural. Being a good person doesn't mean that you will necessarily have those ethical impulses. There is a real different lens that one needs to apply. So I'd be curious to hear how, like practically, how do you train people to do this?
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to all the speakers. Your presentations were awesome. and they really provoked some thinking in our minds, and we really appreciate. So I want to check. I was quite interested to this thing of saying beyond just doing no harm to tackling bad and doing good. And you also mentioned the fact that many times you would use your own experiences in terms of what the risks are. And I wanted to check in terms of at times some risk you might not be aware of, given that there are at times unintended consequences, how you get to maneuver all that. So, and then I'm loving also the issue of evaluative thinking, especially for development practitioners, especially if we are to do no harm, you know, because many times the evaluation function is seen as a function of another, and then these development practitioners are only implementing and not even in circumstances where they're expected not to do harm using the evaluative thinking skill. So to me, it's an issue of capacity development, because this is what we are now pushing to in South Africa, to say the way the evaluation function was brought into South Africa, it's like there's a directorate, a unit within an institution, and even the program managers, as they're implementing, even when they see harm, they just say, oh, the evaluator will come. So we have this feeling that the evaluative thinking skill should be for all program managers. And then also to comment on Adeline's presentation, when she really challenged me, especially when evaluators come in and don't take into cognizance the way of collecting knowledge within society, within a community, because and just bring methods that are probably not context specific is really a challenge. And I think that's one thing, that to make communities to feel like evaluators are them and us, you know, all those things. But if evaluators can embed the data collection methods that those communities, because they obviously in a community, they have a way of getting data, and if we can embed that, that can actually enrich our evaluations. Thank you very much.
Okay,
Thanks a lot.
Ada Ocampo, President of Ideas Global Network. First of all, thank you very much. Very interesting and very useful and valuable contribution to the evaluation community at large. I have a question for Adeline, building on Tina's question, and the other to all the panelists or one of you. And building on Tina's question, my question to Adeline is whether you have considered that a learning can be horizontal, can be north to south, south to north, etc. Because I got the impression that that ethical systems and practice and conduct is really based on how you behave in a region, based on principles cultural of a region. But what about learning from others, building on others' knowledge as well, even if you are selective or not? And my question to the other panelists is that whether you have experience or you have a take on ethics in reporting. I know that ethics in reporting goes beyond what an evaluator, includes an evaluator, but goes beyond what an evaluator does. But when I was working with Tina in UNICEF and doing quality assurance, I was in charge of the quality assurance, I realized that there were several ethical issues in reporting. And I will just put two examples. One is that sometimes the evaluator was practically repeating what he or she believed in many evaluations across the board, even if they were different. And also there is a tendency, and that's probably goes beyond the evaluator, to highlight the good things in a very good way. We are very much prone to highlight successes of the program of the organization. And to me, that also has an ethical consequences and probably many others, but mainly my point is about ethical standards and principles vis-a-vis reporting. Thank you.
Okay, we had Carrie, and can you take more questions or shall we? Okay. You want to respond first? Okay, let's do a round of responses then.
Yeah,
Over to you.
Okay, thank you for those questions. It shows that you're all listening, which is great. So are ethics universal? It depends who's asking and it depends who's responding. So I think the point I want to make is that they are supposed to be universal, but we always pull to our own side, you know, our own worldviews, our own paradigms, and our own. You spoke about epistemology. Where are you coming from? What is your knowledge? And what is it that you know? And sometimes we restrict it to what we know and our own experiences. We don't realize that others have also experiences that we can learn from. And so it is important. So that's why for the African Evaluation Association, we decided that we wanted to put our own evaluation principles out there so that you see what is important for us when you come and do evaluations in Africa. Because I think there's been this othering of, you know, we are coming, the issue is really power asymmetries, inequalities that do exist, depending where I'm coming from and how I perceive the other communities that I'm working with. So I think that is very important. So if we all had mutual respect and we all understood it to be mutual respect, but if we then take different groups of people and we think, no, these are not worth my respect and these are, so I think that's what happens. So I think our worldviews need to really be much bigger, much wider, to know that there are different people that may look different, but we must respect them equally as I would respect anybody else. Adam, your question around, you know, is there horizontal cross-learning and all that? Yes, there should be. It is important. And you see that we've got a principle that we actually talk about. One, learn and adapt from the global South, indigenous communities. So we must also learn from the indigenous communities. We must learn from the different communities and other contexts. Yes, we must also learn from, international communities, but that must be on an equal footing, not learning, for the knowledge to be imposed on us. I think we have to appreciate that everybody has some knowledge, some experiences that they can share, and we need to accommodate that. Thank you.
Thank you for these questions. Very, very interesting. First of all, I will not answer to the question that Adelina has already answered, because I think she has said it so perfectly that I won't do anything better. But I want to take the questions about training and about, which is something I'm really concerned with. People who are starting, I am a teacher of evaluation. I teach people what is evaluation, how to do it, what is the relationship with these things. And in all this teaching, ethics at the beginning, let's say, did not come as something which was important, which was something that had to do with evaluation. Although I have always thought I've always thought that ethics, doing good, finding this was part of our activity or what we do. My own point is that complexity has always existed, ethics has always existed. These problems now, these issues that now are so cogent for us now, it is as if we have invented them. In fact, they didn't, but we did not put so much attention to it. So this is something that, from a point of view of training the people who will become the evaluators, all these areas has to enter into the field in much greater, must have much greater importance. So it is important from what we are saying that this document, like the one she has contributed to, it should be something that to enter into an evaluation curriculum. And these are ideas that should enter into the activity, what is about to do to be as an evaluator. Another point is that the question about asking about unintended consequences, or how we can favor the fact that we understand what is good and what can we do about that. Also, that it comes from the way in which you understand what you should do. Because if we start from the fact that we as evaluators are the people who have to answer the term of reference of a certain for a certain program and do what we are asked to do according to whether finding out whether the program was effective, efficient, and all that. If we do that, and if we are our mind is shaped from that point of view, we may dismiss completely whatever happens outside. But now we know that we cannot avoid thinking of the outside. Now everything tells us that you cannot think in terms of development without thinking in terms of the environment. It is the way in which we live now that ask us to take into consideration all these other aspects. But we have to be prepared to that. I just want to mention the great sociologist who was the first to introduce the social thought to the idea of unintended consequences, which is Robert Merton. He said that you have to have a prepared mind to do that. A prepared mind means that in your training, you have to enter into this idea that whatever you do, because of this complexity, because of what exists, as effects different from what was expected. But that is important. Let me say something. I don't want to, I hope I will not hurt anybody, but let me be very critical toward a guideline that I have read, which is not so much represented here, which is from the World Bank. There is a guideline from the World Bank that says that if you find something good that happened, which was unexpected, do not consider it, because that may have happened by chance. And we are not going toward chance, but we are, listen, we are a result-based organization, and so we want to know whether what we did and we wanted to do happened or not. So I think this is completely wrong, because this doesn't help finding what happened, which was good, and that we can build on that, because next time, next program will take into consideration what happened. So something happening good is not chance. It is because there is a constellation of attitudes of people, of context. Something happened, and we must think why that happened. So, and it might have happened because of many things, and hopefully having to do with the good things that Adeline was saying, that the local people had certain knowledge that we did not expect, and all these kind of things. So we must be prepared, but all our attitude, all our thinking should be oriented toward that. And sorry, I'm too long. And the third thing, so this comes to other question. So in reporting, you should, if you have this attitude, if you think in these terms, then of course it will enter into reporting. Even if I hate those term of reference who say what should be the index of your, the table of contents of your reporting. Or we introduce a last issue that says ethical results or ethical suggestions, or we should be free in reporting what we have found, and from an ethical evaluator will have found something that may be influential and good for those who have done the program and for the people and beneficiaries, and that I think should enter into the report. So to me, it's a matter of being prepared to be a different expert, a different professional from what we have been taught traditionally. And everything in the world we live in suggests that we should change that mind and be more open to these ethical questions.
Yeah, I will try to integrate some more inputs. With respect to the inputs given by Tina, and of course I share totally the answer from Adeline. What I think also is there is still, even if we are speaking of ethics since many years, there are still an issue that is the terminology we use in development field, that sometimes in both implementation and evaluation, our terminology is technicalities. We use concepts that are conceptualized in the maybe in the Global North Scientific Symposium, and they are brought into the field without any translation, without any context related sensitiveness. And this causes, I think, a lot of problem during the implementation and during the evaluation, because it's an issue of also how we pose our question to the beneficiaries. We can have some big bias of understanding if we don't translate these concepts. And so this is on the one hand. And to answer to the evaluative thinking is for all, and how we can improve these skills in implementers and evaluators, etc. I think what we learned in the session this morning on environmental, if something cannot be trained after, this is a process. If we don't include ethics factors, issues, questions into the project design phase, how we can raise them out at the end of the process when the plays are already done and we have not anymore the power to change. We can only measure our failures or our successes. So it is a process. Evaluative thinking is not something that from one day to another with the training of 5 days you acquire, and at the same time the ethical values. And it's a process, is to start from the project design and then continue in the project implementation, and finally to have your checklist and during the evaluation process. And this is very related with another point that is more a question also for you than an answer, because it's to be evaluator requires a certain sensitiveness to some values or ethics or the diversity of the world we face and the diversity of the condition we face with. And so sensitiveness is something that we can acquire or not. So there are soft skills that an evaluator should have that cannot be included in training, in capacity building. This is something that came to my mind many times when I go to the field, with other colleagues, and also toward myself. I questioned a lot on myself on that. And this is something that we really don't speak about it, the sensitiveness and the soft skills that a group, a team, or an individual has to be when approach an evaluation in Global South, in a different cultural context. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I see there are many more hands up. We're kind of out of time. Are we allowed to go a little over?
I asked so we can take 5 minutes.
Okay, let's take another 3 questions from gentlemen. We haven't heard a single male voice. Please, over here, Olivier and the gentleman in the back.
Allô? Allô? Ah, ok. Je vais m'exprimer en français. Hein.
Allez-y.
I don't want to take a risk to speak in English, so in French is better. OK. Ma question, d'abord, merci pour votre présentation, surtout sur les valeurs éthiques, parce que moi, je viens de l'Afrique, du Congo-Brazzaville, et je voulais plutôt avoir votre position par rapport à une situation. J'ai suivi là, vous avez dit doing good, faire du bien, c'est quand même très vaste. C'est quand même, surtout dans des contextes qui est, par exemple, le mien. Donner de l'argent à quelqu'un, par exemple, si je veux contextualiser dans mon propre pays, ça peut être quelque chose, très souvent c'est quelque chose de bien, mais ça peut aussi devenir quelque chose de très mauvais. Tout dépend des milieux. Ce que moi je veux avoir de vous, c'est savoir, vous avez